Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Security Table, where we dispel myths. We
take names.
We never mentioned the people that we're analyzing their written words and spoken words to provide some clarity to it. But I think before we dive into this particular episode, I do believe that Izar wanted to do a poetic demonstration here. And so we will all prepare.
Last episode, I had a interpretative dance to explain where we were starting. So today, to put everybody in the right frame of mind, we are going to open with a piece of poetry from the 80s that, along with the subject of today's episode, turned into something that we can easily call an ode to Adam. You're on the roll and now you pray it lasts. The road behind was rocky, but now you're feeling cocky. You look at me and you see your past. Is that the reason why you're running so fast? And she said, ain't nothing gonna break my stride. Nobody gonna slow me down. Oh no, I got to keep on moving. Ain't nothing gonna break my stride. I'm running and I won't touch ground. Oh no, I got to keep on moving.
Wow!
And if you were just on the treadmill of the gym listening to that, and you are now picking yourself up off the floors, we're sorry.
Sorry. I wish we had a live studio audience so they could applaud and stand after that rendition. I mean, it was beautiful, but it's true. Nobody's going to mess with our stride is the topic of this episode. So let me set it up so our listeners can follow, and our watchers in Australia can follow along with where we're going and what's gotten us fired up at the Security Table for this week. So a LinkedIn post, and which has now become a blog post, has been written. And the title of it is The Top 3 Problems with Stride. Stride all in capital letters, meaning the threat modeling mnemonic. The top 3 problems with Stride threat modeling and what's next. And it begins with this picture of a threat model done in the Microsoft Threat Modeling Tool 2016. Quite bizarre picture, but we can get back to that later. But from a high level, the author, who shall remain nameless, is basically saying that Stride is a 25-year-old checklist, so it's old. Stride's time-consuming and rote, and it doesn't lead people to the right people doing the threat model. The author argues data flow diagrams aren't the best way forward, and then at the end concludes that LLMs should do Stride instead of people. But wait, you just told us about how everything was wrong with Stride. Now we want to turn the LLMs loose on. So there's a lot to unpack here, but I just wanted to set the stage. So the stage has been set. So before we even get into what's written in the blog post, I'm curious what, Matt and Izar, your opinions are of Stride in the year 2024.
So I'm holding in my hands an old tool. It is multi-purpose. You can break things, you can build things with it. It's a hammer. And it's really, really one of the oldest tools that I think that people are aware of. And you know what? It works just fine. And you just have to apply it in the right place, in the right way. If I try to use it as a screwdriver, it's not going to work. So yeah, I'll be keeping my hammer. Thank you very much. Same way as, I don't use Stride every day. I'm not a big proponent of Stride, but it's a tool. We each have a toolkit, and you should have the tools that are going to help you in every single different situation that you find yourself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Matt, what do you think?
So I think we do use Stride almost every day, and if we don't call it Stride, we use Stride. So Stride was a foundational concept, right? And it set the stage for threat modeling as activity. It encompasses a lot of the really core things that we would look for as threats. And it's spun off other things that we now rely on, like Linden, or includes no dirt, or and has other variations, right? Stride plus LM, Stride plus lateral movement. And so to say it's archaic and obsolete, I think it's very misleading. It's kind of like old software components. Some components don't get maintained for a while because they work and they don't need any updates.
Yep.
And so, as a security professional, Stride is critical for what we do. As a developer, Stride is really critical for what they do, even if they don't. If it gets marketed as a compliance thing, then that's different than actually making it a functional thing. I think there's a big misconception, especially where the author's coming from, that Stride has reached its end of life. I think if anything, it certainly hasn't. And in fact, if even if you don't call it a Stride by any other name, may work just the same. And so, anytime you're doing threat modeling, if you're looking at security best practices, if you're looking at design principles or if you're looking at anything that comes out of the attack framework or out of KPAC, common attack patterns, those can all relate to Stride. It's like another good example, for this is we don't refer to ISO all the time, but almost everything we refer to refers to ISO. Mm-hmm. So there's a hierarchy of things. Yeah. There may be something above Stride, like the 4-question framework is a good example, right, in threat modeling. Stride fits within that 4-question framework, and other things refer to Stride in that hierarchy, even if we don't call it that, and even if we don't refer to it, it's still present. So yeah,
let me.
It's fundamental.
Let me share a little story time, because I have an interesting relationship with Stride. I like to refer to this as my love-hate love relationship with Stride. So when I first got to Cisco and I started really pursuing threat modeling, this is back in 2011, 2010 when I'm doing this at Cisco. I find Stride and I'm like, oh, this really makes sense. It's a nice mnemonic. It's easy to get people started with it. It's easy to understand. A lot of times people, they don't look at it and go, this is so complicated to understand. It's simple. It's something they can remember, and it's a starting point. And so I used Stride for a few years, but then I got cocky and I decided, you know what? Stride is just too simple. And I'm going to start teaching threat modeling using other methods. I'm going to go to some of these other sources that Matt mentioned, and I'm going to use those as the basis for how I teach people to threat model. Things like CAPEC and CWE, and those were two of the prominent ones. Attack wasn't available yet at this point, or Defend, but CWE was, CAPEC was, and so I started using those as teaching tools. And you know what I found? People were confused. Because they're like, but there's so many things. How do we narrow it down? How do we understand? This doesn't make sense. You want me to search this database to try to figure out what the things are I got to think about? And then I read the entries and I don't even really understand how it applies to my product. And so you know what I did? I went back to teaching Stride. And so for me, Stride is really a teaching tool and a gateway. Yep. Do I want people to use Stride for every threat model that they ever create, from the first one to the 972nd one that they create? No, but I want them to use it for the first one, maybe the first 10. But what I've seen happen in my experience is people internalize it. They no longer need to go, well, let's go through spoofing, tampering, or PDH. They just make it, they use it enough times, it becomes part of how they operate, part of how they consider what the threats are. And so for me, Stride is a foundational piece of how we approach threat modeling, and it should not go anywhere. But that's where I landed.
Let's make a distinction here. I think it's important, because you can talk about Stride as a methodology, which is a shortcut for the application of Stride in a threat model. You can talk about Stride as the acronym itself, right, with the impacts that something would lead to. And separately, I think that they're both great tools to move people from one stage to another in the journey, especially to get them started, because it doesn't bind. People don't get bound by it, but they get a sort of like, this is where I'm looking at. And that's why Stride is something that you can use to play cards. Elevation of privilege is in there.
Yeah.
And Stride is the structure behind it, right? So it gives you this focus towards those initial speed bumps of how do I even start this thing, right? It gives you a horizon to go to. And I think that as Chris said, sometimes it gets under your skin and you just start doing Stride without calling it Stride, without referring to it as Stride. But you have those impacts in your head, and you are always striving towards them, right?
Yeah.
Across the years, I think that a lot of people try to add something to Stride, but then what happened was what Matt said. You got Lyndon, you got No Dirt, right? Because people keep looking at that acronym and thinking to themselves, what's missing here? What's missing?
Yeah.
And that's a very difficult question to ask and answer.
Stride LM is probably the only direct extension of Stride that I've seen that has had any traction whatsoever. And that's
the one I've actually adopted that going forward. I'm using Stride LM now in teaching, in discussing threat modeling, in advising people on how to get started with it, because I think that lateral movement really is different than elevation of privilege.
Mm-hmm.
Elevation of privilege for me is a given service. You have some user account access and you're trying to elevate that service to admin access or super access or whatever. Yeah. Whereas lateral movement for me is more about how an attacker moves through the network, through the data center, through the Kubernetes cluster, making their way through various containers. And so it's a different thing. It's something, because the argument against LM is to say, oh, well, it's just elevation of privilege. And so I land on, no, it's not. But I think that's a worthy thing to add. And that's something that I'm adding to Stride going forward.
Yeah, it brings in the concept of architecture where traditionally in threat modeling, we sort of ignore the architecture and LM brings that back in. Like there's more beyond this thing than the system that you're modeling. There may be stuff outside of it that you now have to, like if you're modeling a system that is a front end for your back-end infrastructure, it's important to know that I'm not going to stop here as the attacker. I'm going to go elsewhere, right? And LM introduces that.
Which brings us to another point that the author made. Why do I need to make a data flow diagram?
Before we get there, though, sorry, I just want to close. Add one other thing on the Stride discussion. It is possible. It is certainly possible for it to become. While we use it, we're saying here that it's foundational, and I think that's true, and it's a great learning tool, and I definitely think that's true. And then it becomes sort of part of the toolbox that developers and others know, sort of, even if they don't call it and refer to it directly. However, we should recognize that it is possible, and certainly likely in some cases, that you could take that to an extreme and mandate it. And so now it no longer becomes a toolkit, and it becomes now a compliance. So don't do threat modeling, do Stride. And Stride equates to threat modeling, and therefore that's all you know and that's all you can do. Mm. And so there could be some limitations there. And that's important to recognize, right? So it's not just, and it may be that the author had an experience where they worked in an organization that required Stride. End of story, right?
Yeah.
And put it in a bad light.
Yeah. So shall we walk through this article a little bit and explore a couple of the points?
Sure. Yeah, we were going into the TFD, but perhaps before we have to go into the who's supposed to do the threat model anyway, which is a good one too.
Yeah, and I think that's where we see some confusion from what I think the three of us prescribe as to how you do threat modeling here. And I'll just read it verbatim here so we can discuss what we see. I don't like Stride very much. This isn't me speaking. This is the author. I don't think anyone really enjoys Stride, yet it has remarkable use in the industry. In my experience, the usual Stride recipe is to ask, in parens, force an engineering team to make a data flow diagram of their system and then spend some 60 to 90 minutes in a large meeting going and asking the group these questions for each component. And then there's spoofing, tampering. He's got questions associated with each one. this isn't how I recommend people do threat modeling. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think that not only Matt is right, DFDs are not stride, right? DFDs are not necessary. Those large meetings are not necessary. But yes, anybody who has read the manifesto can know. It's actually a good thing to have that large meeting. It's actually a good thing to have a map to your system, a representation that shows where you are right now so that everybody can get the situational awareness of, are we talking about the same thing? And while it's not necessary, it helps. Basically the same way as Stride itself. You don't have to use Stride, but it helps. So the author seems to be putting a lot of tools and helpers in a box, and then closing that box and saying, this is bad, move it away.
Right. And they're all equivalent, by the way, right?
Yes.
So equating the tool and so even equating Stride as a methodology and as a threat library, right? So Stride is ultimately a way to think about threats, and it's a way to influence the methodology. And actually, this is something really important, something we probably should talk about as well, is because Stride brought with it a methodology. You had Stride per element and Stride per interaction, which has been both I think a blessing and a curse, or a good advance and a significant limitation. We see this across the set of tools that are available today. Often we'll use per interaction or per element based threats. And that comes, I think that pretty much comes from the way that Stride was implemented over the years. Right. So you look at a process and how do you spoof that process, or how do you tamper with that process, or how do you tamper with the interaction with that process, meaning a network communication. And so when you look at that point to point threat analysis, that's sort of a shadow of Stride thing. Stride introduced that, I believe that if I remember correctly, and I hope so, because we kind of wrote a book on this. That was a concept that came along with Stride.
Yeah.
To Izar's point, you don't need a diagram to do this, although it helps. We're humans. We're visual. We like them. DFDs are not the only diagrams that exist. Other diagrams can be used, whether you want DFDs or sequence diagrams or C4 models or text,
UML,
whatever you want, right? Yeah. Some representation that you can then look at and go, oh, do I have an interaction that may be susceptible to tampering? And that's how you apply Stride, the library, in a methodology. And then who do you need to involve? I mean, that's up to your organization, right? We look at the Threat Modeling Manifesto, outcomes and the way you operate threat modeling needs to work for your organization and for your team.
Yeah, and I think you've highlighted here something that the author considered a problem. Stride is time-consuming and rote. Stride is good for anything. It's ensuring you've thought of everything. Now, the funny thing is, when I teach Stride and when I use Stride, I throw away the methodology side of it. I don't even tell people to, if this is a data flow, you have to consider these things out of Stride. I just use Stride generically across the entire picture. And I say, let's kind of flow through and look at each thing. I always tell people, focus on places where data flows cross trust boundaries. Start there, because that's where interesting things are always happening in the world of a system. If something's happening deep in the innards of the system and there's a connection between two things, it's probably not that interesting, because as an attacker, I can't, unless I'm in the building, and sometimes like in the horror movies, you're inside the house the whole time. But
almost coming from inside.
Yeah. So I get what you're saying, Matt. There is a methodology behind this. It is, I think you can use that in the early days when people are stuck. Mm-hmm. People can't always freestyle as well into, I just consider all of these threats against everything in my diagram. That's the point of the facilitator in the way that we all teach threat modeling. We don't just turn people loose and say, good luck. We facilitate, we walk them through, we demonstrate a process. So I think that's, I think we've addressed the Stride is time consuming and rote and pointed out what's wrong with that statement. But then we come to who's supposed to do the threat model anyway. And The author provides really three different options: doing it together, and then in parentheses and saying, and waste everyone's time. So I think that's a pretty strong statement there. I mean, I don't consider it wasting my team's time when they come to understand the system that they work on better by understanding the security and privacy properties of it and failures of it in its current instance. The second option, upskill all engineers to expert threat modelers. I love when people use the word expert. I just love expert.
What's an expert threat modeler? Seriously.
Yeah. I mean, give me a definition of that. And then the third one, teach security the intricate details of every system at their company.
That sounds like there's a little bit of a process an issue, the way that their organization has implemented threat modeling. And maybe now's a good time to point to, we Threat Modeling Manifesto now comes with a set of capabilities to consider. This author may want to visit.
But even before that, and that's a great reminder. But even before that, if we look at points 1, 2, and 3, okay, and we go to 1 and say doing it together, and in parentheses and waste everyone's time. Let's assume for a second that this was done in I'm going to use the word proper, but let's say efficient way, right? And it wasn't a waste of everyone's time. Why? Because of points 2 and 3. Upskill all engineers to threat modelers. Let's drop the expert word for a second. And teach security the intricate details of every system at their company. The moment that I have everybody talking together around a process of threat modeling, we get 2 and 3 for free. Because security people are going to learn more about the system, and system people are going to learn more about security. Are they going to come out experts? No. Are they going to know all the details? No. But everybody comes out knowing more about each other's work, which in the end leads to good outcomes, right? Yeah. So don't tell me that doing it together is a waste of everyone's time. You're just saying, you know what? You should get one person, sit them in front of one tool, whatever the tool is, and they'll come out with a threat model. And that's the hero threat modeler, which we have proven again and again is a bad thing.
And devil's advocate, I'll take the author's side for just a moment. Generally don't agree with this, but just a moment. If their organizational goal is purely developer throughput and developer cycles, code delivery, velocity, then maybe you don't do it with everybody. But I certainly wouldn't call it a waste of time. Whoever you do it with and the outcomes you get from it can be valuable.
Yeah, and I would even take it further and say in a highly performing engineering team, I don't want everybody. I want people doing their own threat models. I want small teams forming, probably likely around the Scrum teams as far as how they're doing their work now. I want them threat modeling at that level. I want threat modeling as a discussion point at the stand-up. Hey, we had 3 things come out of the threat model. Let's make sure, do we have tickets assigned to those things? Are we tracking those things through? Yeah, we've got them scheduled for the next sprint, for this sprint, whatever. Like, I don't think of threat modeling as this is kind of like a 1990s approach to threat modeling. Like, let's just have everybody in the engineering team get together and do the threat model. Like, that's how we used to think about this a long time ago, but that doesn't work in the modern day.
You guys are Izar's in the region. Yeah, earthquake alert in his region. So I'm reminded that we had a guest on this podcast a while back who is a recent convert fan of threat modeling, but he, if I remember correctly, the statement he used was, "I don't want my developers doing threat modeling. I don't want all of my developers doing threat modeling."
Yeah.
So there is a thought here that not everyone does it, but everyone should benefit from it.
Yes, but you know what I think about it? I think that everybody should threat model all the time and make it official at every story. But no, I totally can see the assertion that not everybody has to be involved all the time, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that at an individual level, you can do it all the time, even if you're not doing it as a formal process. You can just embed that into your thought process and workflow, let's put it like that, right? Mm-hmm. especially because as a developer, things that you do impact the threat model directly.
Yeah.
And things that you do should be impacted by the threat model.
Yeah. So before we go too far off on a tangent, kind of our own making, I want to circle us back in and just knock out the last couple pieces of this article.
Oh, that's cool.
Why do I need to make a data flow diagram? Matt already, and Izar, you already made points about this. Like, you don't. Stride doesn't require a data flow diagram.
Yeah.
You can apply Stride to a user story if you want to. It's just a conversation. It's a discussion. But then let's go to this last one. So after making, I'm going to set this up in what I feel is probably an unfair way, but I don't care. After making this argument about everything that's wrong with Stride is time consuming. It's 25 years old. It requires a data flow diagram. The author concludes this by saying LLM should do Stride instead of people.
Okay, but hold on. You missed a part of the article that's very important to interpret this.
Please enlighten me.
And so he called out a particular tool as an implement as Stride.
An embodiment of Stride.
And it's really important that
yes, the Microsoft threat modeling tool is not equal to Stride.
Right. So,
but furthermore, he mentioned that tool creates a long list of findings, and that he's very concerned about the amount of those findings that are just marked ignore, right? Because they are not relevant or because they are not at the resolution that the team is looking for.
Yeah.
And then Chris, take it away.
Okay. Yeah. So
I want to talk about the Microsoft threat modeling tool.
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll come back to that. Let's go to the LLM thing first.
I'm baffled when somebody says this thing is terrible. This thing doesn't work. It's antiquated. It's overwhelming in the amount of process you have to apply. But then use it with an LLM.
Okay, he could have said you'd let the intern do it. I mean, would that have been any
exactly.
better?
Exactly. The thing that bothers me here is that if we walk the clock back to a year ago when this LLM thing started popping in the scene, and I remember the LinkedIn posts of people going, I just described my system to ChatGPT and it came out with all the possible threats and it's using Stride and it's amazing. Oh my God, they don't need to threat model anymore. And then they stopped and they read the output. And you know what? The output wasn't exactly very different from what you get from the TMT, both in number and in aspect and in sometimes applicability. You know, the things that sometimes you get from the LLM, something awesome like the ice cream vendor is a denial of service vector because they don't show up on Fridays or something like that. But at the end of the day, you know, it's rules, it's a description, it's a formality applied to a rule engine, and you get what you get. It's the input and it's the output. Can you get good stuff from LLMs? Definitely. Will an LLM threat model for you? Definitely not. Right?
Garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, and I think that what Chris said is just like straight on point. I mean, don't come and tell me that this thing sucks, and then say, oh, by the way, if you just apply this new technology to the thing,
it's less sucky.
I'm not saying that it doesn't suck, but it's not going to be your suck. It's going to be the tool suck.
It gets even better. In the final paragraph, it's a freaking sales pitch.
No. That's fair. Come on. People have to sell their stuff. No. That's
listen.
Fair.
I believe in saying what you believe. I believe in sharing controversial opinions about things that you assess inside.
We never noticed that.
Yeah, I know. It's people don't know that about me. I'm amazing. A bit of a wallflower.
Every time we learn something new. Yeah.
But I mean, take your stand. Don't use it as a sales technique at the end. Come on, that was. I mean, you didn't have to turn it into
Come on. It's today's marketing. Besides, who knows? An LLM might have written this.
That's a good point.
You know.
So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you wanted to talk about the Microsoft threat modeling tool. Let's explore that a little bit.
I want to bring it up because he highlights it as the reason why Stride sucks. Which, again, let's reinforce: Microsoft threat modeling tool implements Stride. It is not Stride.
Mm-hmm.
more importantly, it implements per interaction or per element threat detection using a threat library. And by default, it uses the Stride threat library. Now, I guess I'll just throw it out there. I know you guys probably don't agree with me by saying Stride is a threat library. Ineffective, it is. It's a constrained set of threats that we're looking for. Those threats happen to be more freeform, but
I think that's fine.
And so, but the Microsoft threat modeling tool is both the let's see, it is both, in my opinion, was the best thing to happen to threat modeling and one of the worst things to happen to threat modeling.
Wow, yeah. Yeah.
So at the very least, it jump-started the whole discussion on threat modeling and provided an easy way for people to get started. On the other hand, it provided an easy-to-use tool that was very hamstrung in its capability, and people went full tilt on it and got locked into it.
On the third hand, we are still using it.
And we're still using it. So it has value because it does what it does pretty well. And there's only a handful of other tools out there that are free. I mean, there's some commercial tools, obviously, but there's very few free tools that do what it does. But it's hard to, like, there's a lot of challenges with the Microsoft modeling tool today. At the very least, the rule set and the default rule set. So the default rule set is not simply spoofing, tampering, repudiation, etc. It's all the possible combinations of those things for all the objects that are defined in that, which of course is influenced by Microsoft's SDL program and all of the things that they have to cover.
I mean, do you think they use it still? I don't think they use it anymore.
Some people
I
still
think that they
jump
do.
into it.
Do they really?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that they do.
Which, in light of the news this week, is scary by itself. But let's not go there this week.
Well, I guess the question would be, how much is Copilot, for instance, going to replace it? Right,
Matt, the thing that I'm hearing is it's a one-legged spider. It's not going to put up a web. But you know what? It's good for what it does.
It was good. It was good historically, right? I agree with where Matt was here.
Today.
Let me throw it to you this way: is threat modeling as popular today if there was never a Microsoft threat modeling tool?
Go ahead. Yeah, what's your thought? Because I have an opinion.
I think that even today, okay, if the pointy-haired person comes to a developer and says, "We need to threat model, figure it out," that one person sitting in front of one desktop using one tool could get into the threat modeling tool and the Microsoft threat modeling tool and get something out of it.
Yeah, but that's modern day. I want to go historical.
Yeah. No. Wait. They are going, even historically, they are going to fall out of the bounds of the tool very, very quick. Right?
Unless they don't know that they are. Unless they don't know that they're, right?
It's going to get ungainly very, very quick. Right?
I guess what I mean is if they don't know anything beyond the tool, they won't know that there's more out there. Right? There's no opportunity for free form.
True, but they're going to start carping about it very quick. And that's going to lead them in a journey of discovery of what else is out there. Right? What I mean is, back in the day when I gave the tool to someone and said, "Here, figure this out," or "Let this help you," it was a very short period of time until they came back to me and said, "I can't continue using this because of A, B, C, D, E." Where A, B, C, D usually was scaling, speed, quality of threats, and the fact that sometimes it doesn't load the thing that you just saved 15 minutes ago.
A minor problem.
True story.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, though, is a lot of people picked up threat modeling as a result of the Microsoft threat modeling tool who didn't have Izar as their coach inside of their company to enlighten them. Like, I remember, do you remember the Microsoft threat modeling tool when you had to have Visio installed?
Oh, gosh.
Underneath it to make it work? I remember the initial versions of this thing.
Yeah.
But my premise or my hypothesis here is that the Microsoft threat modeling tool did move our industry forward.
It did.
More than if we had not had it. It definitely moved us further afield than it would have if it didn't exist. Now, was it perfect? Never. Do I love it? No. But was it a part of our threat modeling history?
Yes.
A positive part of it? Yes. It did move. It did move us forward.
And it spun off the creation of tools like the OWASP Threat Dragon,
True,
which tried to provide an alternative to it. Right?
Yep.
Yep.
And it had some capabilities that the Microsoft Webman tool still doesn't have. But it didn't get the same level of traction, probably also because, Microsoft was very aggressive with pushing their SDL program. And of course, all their guidance points to that tool. They built one specifically for Azure cloud services and whatnot. And so there was a lot of traction. They did a good job marketing it.
Yeah.
But to some extent, right. And again, this is where it's also one of the more dangerous tools in this industry. Or worse, maybe a bad thing that happened is once you're in the Microsoft Threat Modeling tool, it's really hard to get out of the Microsoft Threat Modeling tool.
It's like the Matrix.
And there's some fun. I mean, oh my God, the list of limitations around things like model sharing, even cross-model analysis within the tool itself.
Yeah, it's not something for today. It's not something we would recommend. Ready. None of us are recommending it today. We're not telling anybody, go grab the Microsoft Threat Modeling tool. So that wasn't my point. Wasn't that it's valuable today. My point was it was valuable. It's been valuable throughout our history as a community.
Yes.
Right. And so, if the author here is making the equivalency that Microsoft Threat Modeling tool is Stride and therefore Stride is bad because look at all these threats I get, and I'm forced to mark them all ignore just to make security happy. There's a lot of stuff coming together. There's a lot to unpack in that statement. It's not Stride sucks. It's your organization processes are broken or over onerous.
Yep.
And you're using the wrong tool for what you need to do.
Yeah.
And by the way, have
you considered something else short of an LLM?
Yeah. So I want to kind of wrap this. I want to land the plane here, wrap this conversation up, referencing one thing that each of you said, because I think this is really our ultimate answer to people that are struggling with this issue. One is read or reread the Threat Modeling Manifesto. As a reminder, you won't find the mnemonic Stride in the Threat Modeling Manifesto on purpose, because that isn't really the essence of threat modeling. I think it's a valuable piece forward, but in the Threat Modeling Manifesto, you will find the essence of threat modeling. That's the best way I can describe it. The second thing is the threat modeling capabilities. We've pointed a number at this article and shown a number of different things that are just bad threat modeling program practice. This is not a way we would recommend anybody roll out a threat modeling program today. But as it turns out, Izar, Matt, Chris, and 12 or so of our closest friends put together a document called Threat Modeling Capabilities, where we described the different capabilities of a high-performing threat modeling program. And you can take those capabilities and use those to start a program, to improve a program, to assess a program. There's a lot of different ways you can use it. And no, it's not maturity. Just for those people at home that thought it was a maturity standard, it's not. Matt was. I was going to start twitching at me in a second. But my point is, I just wanted to land the plane with this couple of positive references. So if you've heard this whole conversation and you're like, I don't get why everybody's arguing about this, go read the manifesto, go read the capabilities, use those as positive steps forward to make a kick-butt threat modeling program. Use Stride if you want to, because people like us think it's still valuable in our industry.
Use the Microsoft Threat Modeling tool if you want.
If you find value. If you find value in it.
Know why you're using it.
Yeah. So
as long as you find value, Chris is right on the money. As soon as if you get value out of it, keep doing it and keep improving on it. If you don't, find something else. There's a lot of stuff out there to help you.
Yep. And so with that, we'll wrap up this episode of the Security Table, and tune in again soon for us to pontificate for 15 or 30 minutes on somebody else's article. But it'll be a good issue. We won't just pick on an article. There's always an issue.
And nothing broke our stride.
Nothing broke our stride. All right. Thanks.